Yes guys, I'm Brother. Welcome back to the channel. Of course, some more Premier League predictions for you this week. I just want to start this video off by saying apologies for the lack of uploads recently. Of course, I'm trying to take it slow before the World Cup, because as we're getting towards the end of the Premier League, the Championship, then the start of the World Cup, I want to churn as much content out as possible. So I just thought I'd take this week to relax, get everything prepped, ready for them videos. But of course, another big weekend in the Premier League, a massive tie, of course, the Sunday 4:30 slot. Just before we get into this video, if you enjoy this sort of content, leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate all the support on this channel since I started in about February time. I think we're on 31, 32 subscribers now. Of course, I just want to keep building, keep growing, making better and bigger videos for you guys. And if you've ever got any suggestions of something you want me to cover, then let me know in the comments. I'm always open to ideas, and of course, content that you want to see is content I want to make. It's a full billing of Premier League games this week, and of course, some big games at the top and the bottom. So let's just get straight into it, shall we? Starting the 12:30 game on Saturday. The first game is a London derby, of course, Brentford versus Fulham. And I don't think either of these teams really know about form, do they? Of course, one win in the last 5 combined. I mean, Brentford must love a draw at the moment. Of course, 5 in a row now. I mean, there's 3 2-2s and then 2 0-0s, which is just mental. Whereas for Fulham, they had some decent form in the middle part of the season, but of course towards the end they fell off a bit. Of course, 3 losses, 1 draw and a win in the last 5. And before these games, they definitely had hopes of Europe, but I think that's definitely gone away now. Brentford last time out versus Everton, of course, denied the win thanks to a last minute Jude Hall goal. Whereas for Fulham, of course, they went to Anfield, lost 2-0 to Liverpool. And if they had any faint hopes of Europe, they're definitely gone now, I reckon. I mean, they're only 3 points behind Brentford, but about 4 or 5 places. And I think there's too many teams above Fulham that are just better. Of course, Brentford will try and do everything they can to try and win this game, because of course they'll want to try and get Europe after this impressive season. Of course, whether that be the Europa League, the Conference League, maybe in the Champions League is a lucky. Because Liverpool and Chelsea have been slipping down the table a bit recently, so you never know, they could overtake them. And 5th this year will definitely be enough for a Champions League spot, so you never know. I think Brentford will get the job done, especially at home against this Fulham team. So I'm going to go for a 3-1 Brentford victory. The next game is Leeds versus Wolves, a crunch tie at the bottom of the table. For the visitors, Wolves, they could be relegated this weekend if results go against them and they lose this match. I mean, it's been coming since about October, November time. They've been decent recently, fair enough to them, but it's not enough. And I think it'll be this weekend the final seal of fate. Before that West Ham drubbing on Friday, they've been on decent form, of course, beating Liverpool, beating Villa, and even that draw against Brentford when they were 2-0 down was quite impressive. If Rob Edwards had took over a few months earlier, then you never know, he could have done better, but it was always going to be an impossible task to keep Wolves in the league after their start. As for Leeds, of course, they're on some brilliant form at the moment, picking up some vital points, and I mean, their recent result, a 2-1 win at Old Trafford, is just magnificent. Of course, Man United were unbeaten at Old Trafford since Carrick came in until Leeds played them. I mean, that first half and even the second half, they were so rampant, could have been 3 or 4-0 by half time, and I've got to say, Noah Okafor took his goals brilliantly. That now puts Leeds in a position where I think 1 win could be enough for them to stay up in this league this season. They're now 6 points clear of Tottenham in 18th place. And just saying that out loud, that's a mad sentence. Tottenham in 18th in the relegation zone. But we'll get onto them in a minute. Of course, now we're talking about Leeds. If they were to open up a 9-point gap with 5 games to go, then I think that's enough for them. And of course, Ellen Road will be buzzing, of course, the semi-final in a couple of weeks for the FA Cup. And you've got to say, it's been quite a successful season for Leeds, really, hasn't it? And you've got to give Daniel Farke massive credit, of course, over 2 games against Liverpool and Chelsea to save his job. Most people would have thought he'd lost both, he'd be gone, they get a new manager, but he picked up a win versus Chelsea, a draw versus Liverpool, and the rest is history. They've been so impressive to watch recently. Of course, I like to Calvert-Lewin, Okafor, even Stack when he's played. And I think if you're a Leeds fan, you've got to be pretty happy with this season. Of course, it could be even more. Because on current form, I'd say Leeds could definitely beat Chelsea in the FA Cup semi, and then you get to the final, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, even if they got to the final and lost, I think it's still a great achievement for Leeds. And I think this is definitely a step in the right direction for them becoming an established Premier League team again. I think they'll come out victorious against Wolves. I'm going to go for a 3-0 victory, and I think that'll definitely seal Wolves' place in the Championship next season. The second game at 3 o'clock is Newcastle versus Bournemouth. Of course, Eddie Howe facing his former club at St James's Park, and Newcastle aren't on great form at the moment. Of course, he could be on the chopping block come the summer. Of course, last time out, there was leading versus Crystal Palace going into half-time, of course, a last-minute loss. And after the Sunderland and Barcelona defeats, it's just getting worse and worse for Newcastle. Whereas for Bournemouth, of course, they love a draw, apart from the last game where they beat Arsenal at the Emirates 2-1. And even the draw versus Manchester United the game before, of course, 2 impressive performances, 2 impressive results. And I think if they carry on this form towards the end of the season, they're definitely an outside shout for Europe. Because I think it will go down to 8th place this year with the 5th place being a Champions League spot. Obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's how it's going to work. And I've got to say, with some of the fixtures that Bournemouth have got left, of course, some of the relegation teams, you won't back against them. Because with the way they're playing at the moment, of course, they could get there. Of course, the big news coming out of Bournemouth is that Andoni Iraola will be leaving the club at the end of the season. So it'll be really interesting to see who they get as his replacement. The main name for the job at the moment is the German Marco Rose. I think he was at Gladbach and Leipzig, maybe Dortmund as well, I'm not sure. I don't know too much about him, so he might be good for them, might not. But I'm sure he had a decent reputation in Germany, of course, with the bigger clubs, so maybe a team like Bournemouth could suit him perfectly. It's definitely a hard one to call this. Of course, it could go either way. Of course, Newcastle at St James's Park. I think Bournemouth will do the exact same that they did at the Emirates. I think they'll win 2-1, and it'll be yet another disappointing performance and result for Eddie Howe's team. The next game up is the 5:30 game between Tottenham and Brighton. Of course, it's Roberto De Zerbi's first game in charge at home for Tottenham against his former team Brighton, and of course, Tottenham are desperate for 3 points here. Of course, they're in the relegation zone at the moment, sitting 18th, and they're only winning all competitions in 2026. That one against Atletico Madrid, of course, is not really even a win because it was a second leg. And other than that, their form has been horrendous horrendous at the moment. I mean, somehow they got a point at Anfield against Liverpool, but of course back-to-back defeats against Nottingham Forest and Sunderland. Of course, they're sitting 18th now, behind West Ham. We're on 32 points, of course, 2-point gap. And for Tottenham, it's definitely an uphill battle to stay up this season. As for Brighton, they've been on some brilliant form in these last 5-10 games. Of course, 4 wins in the last 5. And of course, their only loss is against Arsenal. Again, they felt they should have won as well. But they're sitting 9th, 1 point behind Brentford and Everton. And I think with them few wins, they've definitely propelled themselves into a European battle. So they'll be looking at this game against Tottenham, where of course they haven't won all year. And they'll be looking to try and get 3 points, of course, to further push their European charge. It's one of them, you just think Tottenham are going to click into gear at some point and stay up somehow. But of course, every game that they'll lose is closer to the reality that they could get relegated. And I think, to be honest, with the form, I think they will lose this one as well. I'm going to go for a 3-1 Brighton win, which will mean more misery for Tottenham. The final game of Saturday is the 8 o'clock game between Chelsea and Man United. Of course, both teams are on the hunt for Champions League football, but have faltered in recent weeks. Of course, Chelsea's only win in the last 5 is that 7-0 versus League One Port Vale, and they've lost crucial games such as Everton away and Newcastle at home. And for Manchester United, of course, after a brilliant start with Michael Carrick, it's on 2 wins in the last 5. And the most recent game, of course, was that 2-1 defeat to Leeds United that I mentioned earlier. And I think it's fair to say both their place in the Champions League aren't certain. Of course, Chelsea at the moment sitting 6th, 4 points behind Liverpool. Man United should get Champions League football, of course, 7 points clear of Chelsea. But of course, they've got to keep winning them games to make sure it's a certainty. If you look at the form of Brentford, Everton and Brighton, is a big worry, especially for Chelsea. Because I think there's a real possibility Chelsea on this current form could fall out of the European place altogether. And that would be an absolute travesty considering how much money they've actually spent. I think it should make for a good game that it's 2 teams that are fighting desperately for 3 points. So that's why I think it's going to be a 2-2 thriller. The first 2 o'clock game of 3 on Sunday is Aston Villa versus Sunderland. Just a disclaimer, I'm filming this on Wednesday before the European fixtures on Wednesday and Thursday night. So for the games involving Arsenal, Crystal Palace, Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa, I don't know the second leg result yet. But for Aston Villa against Bologna, of course, got that 3-1 lead in the first leg. So they'll be full of confidence going to Villa Park, of course, a 2-goal advantage. Villa have stumbled a little bit in the Premier League, of course, the last few games, not won too many. Of course, last time out was that 1-1 draw versus Forest at the City Ground. So especially at home now, they'll be looking to get back to winning ways, of course, cement that Champions League spot. They're 3 points ahead of Liverpool in 5th, and then of course 7 points ahead of Chelsea in 6th. For Sunderland, after a bit of a bump in the road in the Premier League, they're back to winning ways, of course, 2 in a row now. And of course, 2 decent wins as well, of course, Newcastle away and Tottenham at home. And they'll be looking to end this already impressive season with as many wins as possible. I mean, if they were to pick up a couple more wins in the next few weeks, then you never know, there could be European contenders. But I think at this stage of the season, to be anywhere near European football is a massive achievement for Sunderland. Because it wasn't a certainty they were going to stay up. Of course, the last 2 set of promoted teams all went straight back down. And they've really exceeded expectations. Of course, we're nowhere near the relegation zone in April. It's just brilliant. I think it will be a really tight game. I don't know which way this could go either way. But I'm going to go for just about Aston Villa 2-1 victory. The next game is a massive one. Of course, the Merseyside derby, Everton versus Liverpool, the first one in the Hill Dickinson. And in terms of context of the 2 teams, it's probably the biggest Merseyside derby in years. Of course, Liverpool looking to secure the Champions League spot, whether it be 4th or 5th. Whereas for Everton, of course, they're gunning for European football. Of course, if they beat Liverpool, they'll be 2 points behind them. And you've got to say Everton, the much better team in form at the moment. Of course, 3 wins and a draw in the last 5. And a couple of brilliant wins in there. Of course, that 3-0 one to Chelsea a couple of weeks ago. And even the Newcastle away one, of course, it's never an easy place to go, St James's Park. Last time out for Liverpool in the Premier League, of course, was that 2-0 win versus Fulham, the first domestic one in a while. But the last game, of course, that home game against PSG, losing 2-0 after losing the first leg 2-0 as well, which means they've now crashed out of the Champions League and there's no hopes of any trophies this season. And it's looking likely now that Arne Slot will leave at the end of the season. On paper, it's a tough one to call because probably Liverpool have the better squad, but of course, Everton are way better form. But all of that goes out the window in the derby. It's about who turns up more. And to be honest, I think the first one in the Hill Dickinson, the Everton fans will be right on the Liverpool players. I think they'll win. And I'm going for a 3-1 Everton victory. I think they'll just be way too good for Liverpool, to be honest. The final 2 PM game sees Nottingham Forest take on Burnley. Of course, for Burnley, they're pretty much all but down, and their form definitely shows that. Burnley are now 12 points behind West Ham in the 17th. I can't see them picking up half of that, to be honest. Whereas for Nottingham Forest, of course, now 3 points clear of the relegation zone. They're pulling themselves slightly away. It's not impossible that Nottingham Forest get relegated, but it is looking unlikely at the moment. I think under new boss Vito Pereira, they've been much better in terms of the form. Of course, a couple of brilliant results against Tottenham and Aston Villa. And I think at the end of the season, we'll just have about enough to stay up. Like I mentioned, we're Nottingham Forest, so it's a decent haul. Of course, 5 games unbeaten now. And I'm sure with the home game against a team that's pretty much relegated, they'll want to carry that on. Because I think it's a massive 3 points in terms of relegation battle, because it could be 6 points clear by the end of the weekend. I mean, for Burnley, of course, 4 losses out of the last 5. A draw against Bournemouth being the only point. And to be honest, like I mentioned, I can't see them picking up more than 5-6 points towards the end of the season, if that. And to be honest, I can see Nottingham Forest winning this at a canter 3-0. Now, of course, it's a big one. Manchester City versus Arsenal, the race for the title. I mean, I don't think it's outlandish to say the title could be won and lost this weekend. Because if Arsenal went to the Etihad and got a win, of course, they'd be 9 points ahead of City, albeit with a City game in hand. Whereas a win for City, of course, will put them 3 points behind with that game in hand, could go level. And you just sense the last couple of weeks since that cup final that Man City getting form at the right time. Whereas Arsenal, of course, are hitting form at the wrong time in terms of negative form. Of course, losing to City in that cup final, losing to Southampton in the quarter, then of course losing to Bournemouth in the league. Like I said, I'm filming this before the Champions League, so I don't know what's happened in the home leg versus Sporting. They won that first leg 1-0, so whether this is a job out, I don't know. But even if they win that game against Sporting, the nerves are certainly kicking in for Arteta's side. And of course, at the end of the season, of course, the real thing about winning a title is bottle and grit. And it's whether Arsenal have that grit and determination to get it over the line, of course, to get a positive result here against City. I don't know. Hopefully, it should be a decent game. Of course, a couple of years ago, the same situation, of course, with a 0-0 draw. So let's hope it's a bit better than that one, shall we? I think it's a tough one to call because you don't know what sort of Arsenal are going to turn up. I think City are just going to carry on that winning streak. I think it will be a close game, though. I'm going to go 3-2 City. And the final game on Monday night is Crystal Palace versus West Ham. Of course, Crystal Palace unbeaten in the last 5. Of course, that 3-0 win versus Fiorentina. And of course, like I mentioned, this has been filmed before the second leg, so I don't know if they won or lost that second leg. But I mean, with the 3 in the league, you think they should be able to get through, but you never know. And of course, last time out for Palace, coming from behind to win 2-1 against Newcastle, thanks to 2 late Mateta goals. And you've got to say West Ham have been on some decent form as well. Of course, last time out, the 4-0 victory versus Wolves, which of course took them out of the relegation zone for the first time in a while, putting Tottenham there. And I suppose with West Ham, they were looking at a game like this against a team that haven't really got anything to play for, try and get a win. Because if results were to go their way, they could set up a 5-point gap between themselves and Tottenham in 18th. And I'm sure now West Ham are out of the relegation zone, they don't want to go back in. I think this should be a decent game between 2 teams. Of course, we want to end the season on a high. And I can see this being a 1-1 draw. And there we go, guys. That's my prediction for this weekend's Premier League games. As always, if you're new around here, leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and also go check out my socials, my Instagram, my X, and my TikTok. Of course, on Instagram and TikTok, I post a lot more short form content about Premier League, about Championship, about Sheffield United. So if you're not following them, what are you waiting for? Links in the caption. And I'll see you guys in the next one.